Now, as I was one of the first to say that his reign would begin, I'm now ready to be among the first to say that his reign will end. Definitely. He's done. You could write it down in stone. He will not finish his first term.
Smell something, man. You smell something?
I definitely smell something in my hair.
I smell pussy.
Buckle up. Of course this is wrong. Adam Schiff is right. Adam Schiff didn't do anything wrong. He disagrees with them politically. Now you're censoring people for disagreements? That doesn't make any sense at all. Well, how am I supposed to debate? Well, we didn't like what he said. I'm gonna censor him. No, censure was supposed to be for criminal activity or something outrageous, right?
True, but just counterpoint of that, did he not go on TV repeatedly and say, I have evidence that Trump himself colluded with Russia, and that evidence did not materialize?
I can't go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now.
So you have seen direct evidence of collusion?
I don't want to go into specifics, but I will say that there is evidence that is not circumstantial.
Robert Mueller said the Russians did interfere in the election, and they did it to help Trump. All he said was Trump didn't do anything back, right? Like meaning within the election, a quid pro quo, right? He might have done things back later when he was president, but he didn't do it during the election. And by the way, I agree with that conclusion. Donald Trump did it. Whether it was Stormy Daniels or some business dealings with the Russians, Trump knows something his lawyers don't know and his advisors don't know, which is that he's guilty. Why do you think he's flipping out like this? He might have done things back later when he was president, but he didn't do it during the election. And by the way, I agree with that conclusion. They have already a ton of evidence, and they're gonna have more because he did it. And by the way, I agree with that conclusion. That yes, he has some relationship with the Russians. Schiff saying he's got evidence that however he phrased it about the Russians.
And there is significant evidence of collusion. There is ample evidence, and indeed there is, of collusion of people in the Trump campaign with the Russians. I think there's plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy.
But Schiff saying he's got evidence that however he phrased it about the Russians interfering in that election isn't even wrong.
Bullshit.
If he says he had evidence that Trump actively colluded with it, yeah, that's wrong. Now have the Siberian candidate. It's the Republicans who have the Siberian candidate who is now going to be our president and apparently has some sort of secret relationship with the Russians. If he says he had evidence that Trump actively colluded with it, yeah, that's wrong. I actually think he really is in bed with the Russians, so that if the Russians fired and even killed Americans, that he really wouldn't do much about it.
If he says he had evidence that Trump actively colluded with it, yeah, that's wrong.
I also want to be clear about my position, for example. So I think that Trump definitely has a deal with the Russians. Now, my belief is that yes, he has some arrangement with the Russians. Okay. If he says he had evidence that Trump actively colluded with it, yeah, that's wrong. There's credible reports about the Chinese doing this in LA, New York, etc., but they're not connected to Trump. The Russians are very, very, very clearly connected to Trump. If he says he had evidence that Trump actively colluded with it, yeah, that's wrong. Now, remind me again how there's no evidence connecting Trump and the Russians. If you just care to look a little bit, there's a mountain of evidence. But anyone who tells you Trump is not connected to the Russians doesn't know one fact about this case. If he says he had evidence that Trump actively colluded with it, yeah, that's wrong. What Russians? Well, I don't know. What do you mean Russians? When they asked Trump about the Russians, he said, I tweeted out that I have no dealings with Russia. You have no dealings with Russia? He has all the dealings in the world with Russia. If he says he had evidence that Trump actively colluded with it, yeah, that's wrong. I would put that in the bucket of tens of thousands of lies that they say every day in Congress. Overall, you'll see here that there's just so much, there's a mountain of evidence connecting him. Remember, Trump keeps saying, I've never done business with Russia. I don't know what you're talking about, Russia. I don't have any connections to Russia. You've had connections with them for decades. I would have been like, we're talking about lying? We're talking about lying, okay? You guys went along with a fake elector scheme.
This election was stolen from President Trump. President Trump won the 2020 election.
You guys went along with a fake elector scheme.
Under the Electoral Count Act that was passed In the 1800s, after the election of 1876, the count was passed in 1886. The Electoral Count Act lays out a process to challenge electoral votes.
Okay. We're talking about lying. We're talking about lying. Okay. You guys went along with a fake elector scheme.
The Constitution, under the 12th Amendment and the Electoral Count Act, lay out a process. Now, the interesting thing is that the act itself has never been challenged constitutionally. That's why there's a question as to the role of the vice president. I'm on record saying that I believe for the vice president to have a very significant role in that process. Others, such as John Yoo, a constitutional scholar, also believe there's a significant role to be played by the vice president when he opens and counts the electoral votes.
You try to overthrow our democracy because you're all of you are a bunch of goddamn liars. Liar believed in fake electors, fake electors, fake electors.
Fraudulent electors. Is that something you ever worked on or would support, for example, in Michigan?
That's so funny. It's not fraudulent electors, Ari, it's alternate electors.
Fake electors.
Because of the process, again, that's laid out in the Constitution under the 12th Amendment and the Electoral Count Act, there's a process for electors to be challenged. If those challenges are successful, you need an alternate slate of electors, just like happened in 1960 when the Hawaii slate was challenged. It was not challenged successfully, but there was an alternate slate set.
No, spare me your crocodile tears about lying, you trash heap of liars that form the entirety of the Republican Party. What I'd been telling you guys is, no. He made a financial deal with the Russians. One of his knuckleheaded sons, Eric Trump, brags to a golf writer a couple of years ago about, oh yeah, we got the loans for all the golf courses from the Russians. One of his knuckleheaded sons, Eric Trump, brags to a golf writer a couple of years ago about, oh yeah, we got the loans for all the golf courses from the Russians.
It's the greatest hoax of all time. I was there throughout the campaign. We have no dealings in Russia. We have no projects in Russia. We have nothing to do with Russia.
Well, let's go to one of the Trump family members, Donald Trump Jr. Back in 2008, of course, knucklehead that he is, he doesn't know that he's supposed to be covering this up. So he says, quote, Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. We see a lot of money pouring in from Russia. Oops.
I mean, to me, it's without a question, reads and smells like a witch hunt.
No, you have to focus on fake electors. They literally had fake electors.
Yes, I was part of the process to make sure there were alternate electors for when, as we hoped, the challenges to the seated electors would be heard and would be successful per the 12th Amendment of the Constitution and the Electoral Count Act.
When you hear fake elector, you go, oh yeah, those guys are lying. Oh my God, they were trying to overthrow the election. Oh my God, they hate democracy.
And you would then support putting in these alternate, or others call them fraudulent electors. You support that. You don't see any chance there that could be against the law, Boris?
It is absolutely not against law. It is actually according to the law.
Every day they should be talking about fake electors, hate democracy, bunch of fascists. You know who comes up with fake electors? Fascists do.
The perpetration of fraud was absolutely done, and it was done by the Democrats, it was done by the left, by Mark Elias and others. So Ari, everything that was done illegally by the Trump legal team, according to the rules and under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani. We fought for the truth, and the truth is that there was overwhelming fraud in the 2020 election, and I'm doing everything I can possible within all the rules, laws, and regulations to make sure that that truth comes out.
I censure all of you, okay?
I am your voice.
Bunch of fascists.